Welcome to the Cake Therapy Podcast, a slice of joy and healing with your host, Dr. Altricia Foster.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Cake Therapy Podcast, your slice of joy and healing. And as usual, we always have great slices of conversations and great artists in the space talking about their journey through their art and their experiences. Today, we're lucky to have Mrs. Karen Lightfield. She's the owner of Custom Cookies by Karen. And listen, this lady is an influencer, okay? She has over 90,000 followers on TikTok, where she showcases her amazing sugar cookies, demonstrating to her audience the process of making these cookies. We are happy to have Karen on the show today. So thank you for joining us.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me. This idea of sharing journeys to help each other is absolutely amazing. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much for coming. You know, Karen sprinkles sweetness one cookie at a time, right?
I try.
That's her look. She's sprinkling. She's her mother. That's her mother. She's sprinkling sweetness one cookie at a time. But how are you? How are you feeling right now? Tell us about your mental health, your challenges right now.
Absolutely. So, January can be hard, for a lot of people. January can be one of those months where there's lots of darkness and snow and maybe for cookiers or bakers or cakers, we aren't getting the maybe orders that we're used to getting. I've seen a lot of that come by. And really, I think this time of year is just a time to regroup, maybe focus on the things that we can focus on, focus
Right.
on what we're going to do in the new year, how we're going to have our
Mhm.
businesses grow. And it's okay to have some of that downtime in terms of orders or maybe those orders coming in, because guess what? This is how life is. So
Yeah.
you need to kind of plan accordingly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm doing a lot of content now. I'm doing a lot of thinking, processing, kind of putting some ideas out there. I just on TikTok last night was doing Easter cookies. It's
Okay.
January. But
Yeah.
again, I teach virtual classes, so I have to be, it's like being in retail. I have to be ahead of the game. So I'm doing a lot of that in January. My daughter is in Arizona. She's moving home the end of the month. So
Okay.
I am
Good
in
for you.
Maryland. So that's
Mm-hmm.
been quite a challenge. They've been there for about a year and a half. So I'm super excited to have her home. She's my baker. So I'm
Yeah.
loving that she might be coming back to help me with some of the baking. That's not my favorite part. Love the decorating.
I know, good. For me, I don't really enjoy the baking part either. I am really a decorator at art. I don't call myself an artist,
Mhm.
because it takes a lot of practice and experience. And I would prefer someone to call me an artist as opposed to me. Oh yes, I'm chef this, I'm artist this, right? So
I I hear you. Absolutely. Matter of fact, I do that on TikTok often. I don't try to, I want to bring value to myself, but you don't want to be, braggadocious. And I will have people say, Karen, stop, you're an artist. And it feels
mhm,
good, right? But
yes,
I'm with you. It's kind of like I don't want to brag
yeah.
or put myself out there when I know there's other people that have been doing this a lot longer than myself or have been trained differently.
Yeah. Excuse me. And I absolutely agree. It's better let them tell us as opposed to us telling ourselves.
I
We
hear you.
have the confidence that we take into the space to be able to create the work or create our art. But like, oh, I'm artist this, I'm chef this from Sugar Spoon Desserts. Now we just wait on those.
Well,
So
your quiet demeanor and your vibe, I think allows people to see that in you. You don't have to share it. I've seen that in your podcasts, in just your work. It's amazing. So
thank
I'm
you
going to
so
call
much.
you an artist.
Thank you so much, Karen. And I'll call you an artist too.
Great.
So, so you mentioned my vibe and everything. So we've met in several classes. So let's talk about that experience. Karen and I met in a conference, and she taught some of the sessions there, and she's an amazing instructor.
Oh.
And as we go along in the conversation, you'll understand why she's so good at his instructions, right? So I'm a Marylander myself who's moved to Minnesota. Yeah,
Mm.
interestingly. Tell me your thoughts on Minnesota when you come here.
Listen, my first exposure to Minnesota was through friends. We adopted from Bogota, Colombia, and we met
Mm-hmm.
friends that were adopting. We met in Colombia, and they happened to live in Minnesota. So we had been there. We'd been there since 1999. I guess every 5 years or so, we would go back and visit. So my heart is in Minnesota because our lovely friends are there. But my
Yeah.
first time doing a cookie kind of workshop in Minnesota was last January. And this was through Primera with their Eddie, the edible ink printer. And
Yes.
they had me come to Minnesota in
Mm-hmm.
January. You can imagine. So that is quite a challenge because guess what?
Yeah.
It snows a
I
lot in
can't.
January in Minnesota. Luckily for me, that first experience with Primera
It
in
does.
Minnesota last January, it was a beautiful week. So we had no issues with the weather. And of course, they picked that time because guess what? January tends to be a slower time for cookiers, cakers, bakers. So
Yeah.
they picked that time so that we could kind of come together and not be worried about orders so much. So I appreciated that.
Right. Right.
Glad to have missed the weather. So Minnesota, you get a lot more snow than we do. Now, I will tell you, in Maryland right now, we have about 7 inches. We got some snow this
Yeah.
week. So
That's what I'm hearing.
we have gotten a little bit of snow. I think schools were in session for 1 day this
Mm-hmm.
past week. So yeah, I think Minnesota's fantastic.
And here's what's interesting. We haven't had major snow. We've been like warm, I would say, right? We were like below zero for a couple days last week. But I think today we're gonna be in like the 20s and the 30s, and hear us, right? Talking about 20s and 30s being warm.
Well, that's Minnesota for you.
Yeah, we have to take it where we can get it. So that's really, really interesting. So I know you're a teacher, right? By profession. And from your website, I'm going to quote you, right? You said, you began decorating sugar cookies with my brothers, sisters, cousins as a young child. Your grandmother, who you refer to as Nanny, would gather her grandchildren together to bake and decorate Christmas cookies. And it was one of the holiday traditions that we never skipped.
Yeah.
That paints to me such a heartwarming memory, because I did that with my own grandfather, when I was growing
Wow.
up. Not as much, but he was the baker in the family.
Mm.
So take me back, or take our listeners back to the beginning and talk about that very early spark that of your love for pastry.
And you really hit the nail on the head because it really does come back to me, to family,
Mm-hmm.
to a feeling, to gathering around a table and just laughing and sharing. And my grandma, who we did call Nanny would make, she actually worked in a cafeteria in an elementary school. So she had those big pans she would bring
Uh-huh.
home every Christmas, and she would make each of us rolled out cookies. And back in the day, excuse me, we did those cutters that have the little rims in them, almost like a
Okay.
fondant cutter now. So she
Mm-hmm.
would literally, and there were probably, let's see, there were 5 kids in my family back in the day. We now had 6.
Yeah.
And then plus my cousins. So we're probably 10 of us gathered around her tables with these big pizza trays full of cookies that she would roll, cut
Right.
out, put on a tray for all of us. And we didn't use royal icing back then. We used, I think it was like an egg wash with gel food color or with liquid food color.
I
And we would
see.
paint the cookies before they
Mhm.
baked. Do you remember doing any of that as a young child?
No, I remember what I remember with the egg wash was putting it over like pastry or something. But no,
I
I,
keep
I
trying to find the recipe, and I need to ask my mom again because it's either like condensed milk or a little bit of egg wash with gel with water with food coloring, and then
Mhm.
we bake them. So we would paint and then they would bake, and they would be these gorgeous, almost like stained glass. That's what
Oh,
it kind of reminded me of. And then, of course, we would add sugars, sanding sugars to them of different colors. So those are my first memories of
yeah.
baking cookies. So when my daughter was in high school and her boyfriend went off to college,
Yeah.
she needed something to kind of keep her brain active.
Mm-hmm.
So we started decorating cookies, more so outside of that Christmas holiday time. So
Yeah.
it was an Easter, and we were starting to decorate cookies, trying to keep her from thinking about the boyfriend being away.
Mm-hmm.
And I posted on Facebook these pictures of these cookies, and one of my girlfriends from way back when said, "Oh, Karen, do you have a cookie business?" And I did not at the time. I was still teaching kindergarten.
Yeah.
And she said, "Well, can you make these cookies for my son's engagement party?" And I said, "Sure, no charge. I'll just make them for you." So I made some cookies for her, posted those pictures on Facebook, and voila, I was
Yeah.
like, I guess I do make cookies.
Yeah.
So that's really how my business started, in terms of being able to start thinking of it as a way to contribute money to my family, and a way
Mm-hmm.
to maybe transition when I'm finished with teaching into the cookie world. So it
Yeah.
was really, really cool that my daughter was there with me, kind of like figuring things out as we go. And she's an amazing baker. So I
Right.
really liked being able to kind of help her keep her mind focused, and also help me with that creativity and thinking about how
Mm-hmm.
I can grow at the time I was 52 years old. So
Yeah. You know what I absolutely love about being in the kitchen with family members, and especially our daughters? This is what I encourage in our foundation, that baking can really help to build communication between a parent and a child. It can help to build communication between relatives. So that's why I really promoted, this aspect of cake therapy or baking therapy, because that's what happened to me and my mother in the kitchen as I was learning to make cookies and cakes, back in, a couple of years ago. So I like that you brought up this interesting point here, that you
and
did this with your daughter.
it's kind of like, as a parent, when you're driving in the car, it's a really good time to talk,
Mm-hmm.
because they're behind you and there's no eye contact, right? It's the
Yeah.
same type of idea. You're focused on something else, decorating cookies, and that conversation really does start to flow, maybe a little bit more than it would if you were sitting down and saying, "Let's talk about that boyfriend going off to college."
I know.
Doesn't feel very good, right? It just you're right. It opens that line of communication without being threatening at all.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Was you talk about your nanny and learning that from her? Was she able to, was she alive to see the cookie business, the entrepreneur that you became?
She was not, unfortunately. She had passed many years ago, but it
Mm-hmm.
it still is, what it's bringing up for my family is memories that we
Right.
all remember from
Mm-hmm.
that cookie experience, or just being together at the holidays, or doing something kind of to benefit everybody.
Yeah.
So it definitely has trickled down into the generations, even if Nanny
Mm-hmm.
wasn't here to actually see it. And we know she's watching and very,
Yeah.
very approving of what we're
And
doing.
smelling.
Yes, exactly. And she's probably being a little critical over my dough, or
Yeah.
the fancy tools that we have that they did
I
not have back
know.
in the
I
day.
know.
For sure.
Advancements, man. It's crazy. You
It
know,
is.
yeah. Um, you know, you mentioned asking your mom about the possible condensed milk recipe, right? If you do find it, send it to me and we'll add it to, the intro.
Absolutely. I will certainly
Ye-
do that, because it's one of those things where we remember mixing it up, we remember what it looked like, but what was in
Mhm.
it, I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you find this, we interviewed a previously incarcerated baker
Wow.
the other day, and she learned to bake in prison. And she
Wow.
was telling us about a concoction where she used the color from the M&M to color the cream from the Oreo cookies. My goodness. Yeah.
Wow. The
I
things we
know.
have to do sometimes, right? To get
Yeah,
that point across.
absolutely.
She didn't have
Mhm.
access to gel food colors. She has to figure out what to do.
Yeah, yeah, she
Amazing.
absolutely did. Yep.
Mm.
You are retired.
Yes.
Yeah, you're a retired kindergarten teacher. What led you to teaching?
Oh, Oh my goodness. I remember in 4th grade, for some reason, wanting at that time, I think it was my obviously my elementary years experience, just wanting and thinking that that could be me up there.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the years, I had teachers that, and I would share that with them, and they all agreed that they thought that this would be a really, really good career for me. Obviously, I like to talk, so that helps. And I don't know. I'm a nurturer by nature, and I think being able to communicate and teach and be a mentor for others to me has always been something really important. And I didn't know I wanted to teach kindergarten until
Okay.
I was in college, and I got to experience some amazing educators at that level.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day when I was much younger, I thought 5-year-olds, what are they going to learn? I thought it was going to be a lot more like babysitting,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not. They're amazing. They are just little sponges, and they absolutely adore you, no matter what. I do not have a great singing voice, and all of my children over the years kept telling me how beautiful my voice was. So
Oh my gosh.
there's that. But I
Yeah.
think just wanting to kind of spread and help people feel like they can learn and they can grow and that they are good enough, and that
Mm-hmm.
we all kind of have a different path and a different journey. It's not a race to get to that reading level or to that math level. So I really think that was what it was for me.
Yeah. How long did you teach for?
I actually taught 33 years, so a very, very long career.
Yeah.
And every year was in kindergarten except for when I was, when Lainey was 3, my daughter was 3 and 4, I wanted to be her teacher, so I opened a little preschool in my house,
Yeah.
and for 2 years, we had children come in, and we did morning and afternoon preschool, and then when she went off to kindergarten, I was able to get a kindergarten position at a current or where she went to elementary school, so that was really fun to be
Okay.
able to have that experience together at the same school. My
Mm-hmm.
master's is in special education. So that first year back at the new county where we live,
Mm-hmm.
I taught special ed, and that was quite an experience. And then the following year, I was able to get back into kindergarten. So of my 33 years, 30 were in the kindergarten classroom, and then 3 were at the preschool level.
Yeah. Why did you tell me about wanting to teach special education? Why did you go into that specialty?
That's a great question. For me, what it came down to was being in the classroom, and I started my career as a teacher in '89. So back in '89, we would have a lot of students come into the general ed classroom that were
Mm-hmm.
coming in with some needs at that 5-year-old level. Oftentimes in kindergarten, we are the first exposure to maybe what typical development is. So
Right.
parents often didn't know coming into kindergarten that their child maybe was not exhibiting completely typical behaviors. And
Okay.
I just did not have the knowledge as a general ed educator to kind of know what I was looking for. So I
Mm-hmm.
looked to my special educator teacher friends, and I really thought, wow, they have that experience, they have that knowledge base that I think as a general educator I really need
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
that I can kind of be that first look for
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these parents.
Yeah.
So I went to Johns Hopkins here in Maryland and
Mm-hmm.
got my master's in special ed. And I always wanted to teach the general ed classroom, but I wanted to have children with disabilities included in my room. So in Maryland, we call that the inclusion classroom. And
Okay.
throughout my career, I really did. I was the general educator and I worked with special educators, but I had that knowledge base to be able to feel
Mm-hmm.
confident in my abilities to meet their needs.
Yeah. You know what I love about people who have the ability to recognize when there are gaps or loopholes in their education and chase after it, because I admire that more as opposed to just sitting back and saying, okay, I didn't get trained here, I don't have that, and just pass it off to someone else. So kudos to you for
Well, thank you.
recognizing that
Thank you.
there is.
And I think kind of what you're doing too, it's almost like you're not saying I have all the answers, right? You're saying,
Mhm.
how can I learn more
Yeah,
by offering this podcast
right.
to a community where it's really about the community and not about competition or about who's better or who has the fancy tools. So I think that in a way you're educating like that too, but you're also saying, hey, I don't have all the answers. Let's
Yeah.
learn from others.
Exactly. And let's see how others use this tool,
Yep.
right? And I'm also saying that it doesn't have to be this tool, but there are
Mm-mm.
other forms of artistry that you can use to help transform your life. So yeah, that's
And it's
exactly what
very
art.
eye-opening, and I think if I think a lot of us as bakers, cakers, cookiers, you have to have an open mind, right? You
Yeah.
have to be able to learn and grow and realize that you don't have it all. So I think opportunities like this to hear each other,
Yeah.
share their stories, and to share their fears and maybe the things that they can offer is
Mm-hmm.
super important. Really, really
Yeah.
important.
Absolutely. And the thing about it is, like, this bake world, this cake world, this cookie world, it can be so intimidating, right? Because there are girls and guys who are looking in and they come and they see, oh, 17,000 followers. They see over 100,000 followers. And they're like thinking, this person is unreachable. We don't have access to this person, when in fact you do. Right? When in
Mhm.
fact you do. So I'm really trying to create some accessibility for people to really hear why all of us are doing this. We're not necessarily, we didn't come into it just to make money. We did come into it for healing.
Absolutely. And if you do come into this business for the money, it's kind of like being a teacher, right? It's not really what it's about.
Yeah.
You can certainly make a living, and you can certainly work it out so that you can be a contributor to your family or to
Mm-hmm.
maybe a vacation fund or things like that. However, having accessibility to each other at any level, again, kind of goes back to the classroom, right?
Yes.
It is really, really important. And even at 90 some thousand followers on TikTok, I think one of the uh, things I hear a lot is, "Oh my gosh, you responded." Well, yes, if you have a
Mm-hmm.
question, I don't,
I
think I have
know.
the time. I'm just Karen here in Maryland. I'm going to answer you. But I think people may look at that and go, oh, that's somebody else. And we're just people, we're
Yeah.
just regular old people that are trying to do what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about it is, I think when people say, oh, you responded, I think bakers and cookiers are somewhat introverted people. That's why they choose this lonely profession or this lonely hobby where they can sit still. So sometimes they themselves are in fear of responding and not feeling like they, oh, you're asking me? I don't know. I'm just here baking, making
Yeah,
my
no,
icing, right?
that's a really good point though, because why, unless you own a storefront and you have people and you're interacting and you're right, most bakers and cakers and cookiers are kind of that one man show, and you're got your head down and you're doing what you got to do to kind of get to that next order. So I think
Yeah.
being able to be visible and accessible is probably maybe something that really is needed more than we even think.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't think that, or, the people who follow us and the people our customers really realize that what plucks us from obscurity are the things that we're making, because we would rather sit behind our DMs, not showing our faces, until something goes viral and then it plucks you out of obscurity, like your hiding space. Now
Whether
you
you
have this
want it or
response.
not.
Exactly. Now you have the responsibility to show up.
Yep. But you know what? That's a really good word, because I think responsibility is part of it. If you're going to put yourself out there, we do have a bit of a responsibility to our followers or to our customers to
Hmm.
kind of offer what we our best foot forward, right?
Yeah,
And on days
absolutely.
when I'm not having my best foot forward, I just don't go live on TikTok, right? Or
Yeah,
that's when I kind of close down and I do my thing and I put on my music and I kind of get that energy back in me so that I can
yeah,
come back. And it's not even a performance. It really, to me, it's more about being able to give back, right?
yeah.
If you're not feeling it, don't try to give, because it's not
Hmm.
going to be authentic. It's not going to be genuine.
Yeah, because you know what? Um, I'm baking through a lot right now.
Mm,
And I have a friend who recently lost a son,
mm,
and I wasn't going through anything prior to her losing the son, so I was there. I was there. But then I had to put my mom into a nursing home because
mm,
of her stage 3 dementia. And she said to me, and I was apologizing to her at the top of the year, saying, I'm so sorry I haven't been there. And she
Mm.
said to me something that was really profound. She said, "You cannot pour from an empty cup." Like, so please do not expect us to show up if our cups are empty too, because
Wow.
this is our space to regroup and reconnect with ourselves.
And
So
kind of know when that is, which is going to be different for you, gonna be
yes,
different for me, gonna be different from another baker. And
yep,
but I like what you said in terms of you're baking through things,
mm-hmm,
because that is really what we do, right?
yeah,
You
yeah,
are really using that, what you're doing, you're mixing and you're baking and you're rolling as therapy.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely,
Mm.
and it really has been. I'm gonna share a copy of my book, Cake Therapy: How Baking Changed My Life. If you haven't bought it yet, I'll have the my producer send one over to you, and you
Mm.
will see the things that I've actually baked through.
Wow.
So yeah,
I'm eager to read that.
it's very interesting. So we were talking about, before we digressed, I say, but this is good. We were talking about your years of being a kindergarten teacher, right? When did you decide to not be a kindergarten teacher anymore and start custom cakes by Karen?
You know, it's one of those um, periods in your life where you can't look at it and go, "Oh, wow, I think this is the plan." It was just it just very happened very organically. I had been teaching for about 28 years, and
Mm-hmm.
kindergarten has changed a lot,
Okay.
and I think there's a lot of rigor expected on 5-year-olds. So I was having a bit of a hard time settling into the fact that what we're expecting of children has changed, even though child development has not changed. So
Mm-hmm.
I just started thinking about, what am I going to do? Am I going to continue to stay kindergarten teacher? And I loved my families, loved the children, loved my staff. So those relationships were super, super important to me. However,
Yeah.
I wasn't really liking what kindergarten was necessarily looking like anymore in the public school system. So when my daughter and I started baking cookies again year round, it just started to take off. And so for the last 3 years of my teaching career, I would teach all day and I would come home at 4, quickly put some dinner on, and then I would decorate cookies in the evening. And I would stay up
Mm-hmm.
till, midnight sometimes and have to get up again at 6 and do that. So I did that for several years. And then, of course, this was right before COVID. So
Mm-hmm.
during COVID, if you're a parent out there, you remember the period of time where everybody was doing virtual learning, which was hard enough, right? That was tough, but at least everybody was doing virtual
Mm-hmm.
learning. But when we came back into the public school system, there was a period of time where we did something called concurrent teaching. And that meant that I was in the classroom teaching maybe 10 children in my
Mm-hmm.
classroom who had Chromebooks in front of them. So I had to teach them through the Chromebook. And then I had maybe 15 more children who did not come back to the classroom yet for whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason. And
Yeah.
they were working from their Chromebooks at home.
Yeah.
So imagine being in a kindergarten classroom with Chromebooks for the 10 that are there, 15 at home with a Chromebook, and you're trying to teach 5-year-olds. And 5-year-olds don't learn best through sitting down through a
Mm-hmm.
laptop. That was when I came home and I said to my husband, if I ever have to live through concurrent teaching again, and I would never quit, but that was my
Yeah.
topic. I said, if I ever
Right.
have to do this again, my fear is that I'm not going to be able to. And he said, why don't you think about retiring? And I said, well, we're not there yet. And he being Mr. CPA that he is, said,
Mm-hmm.
we can make this work. Let's just throw some numbers out. So we kind of sat down and looked at it. And with my cookie business taking off, and I was working pretty much 2 full-time jobs. He was
Mm-hmm.
like, you've got a pension. Let's see if we can make this work. So that's when I decided that it was a good year to go ahead and put my retirement in, and
Yeah.
then to just focus on the cookie business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know what? People have made a lot of life decisions, life-changing decisions during the pandemic, and right after we were emerging, out of,
Yes.
we're returning to work or returning to school, whatever. One of my I loved having my kids home during the pandemic. But let me tell you, one of the things that I've noticed, my kids don't write well.
Yes.
Can I tell
Listen,
you?
I remember trying to show the little ones, how to hold their pencil through the Chromebook, make
Yeah.
sure you're grabbing it and holding it down. You can't. And I think handwriting per se, really took a turn during COVID, and we're
Mm-hmm.
still seeing it. Those occupational therapists are having to work with more children now because they didn't have that fine motor development that they would normally get in the young early childhood classroom.
Absolutely. I've seen that. My kids' penmanship is just horrible.
Yep.
So yeah. I needed to mention that. Like that COVID took a toll on those handwritings, you
Well, I
know?
bet your listeners are all going, yes, that's what it is. They don't know how to hold
Yes,
a pencil.
of course. Man, that writing is horrible now. I have to be constantly in the rooms because they both have like desks in their rooms and stuff. Like, I'm checking homework and I'm like, you can't turn that in. You have to
No.
redo this.
What were you
It's there.
thinking?
It's all over the place. It's running into each other. There's no space between the words.
Yep. Yep. And I think that was probably one of the hardest parts for teachers and parents and children all around to be able to go, golly, you really do need hands-on, right? You really do
Yeah.
need some of that hand over hand time
Mm-hmm.
to develop that skill or the practice with somebody that's not mom, because guess what? The mom kid teaching for most of us does not go well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They don't want to hear it from mom how to hold their pencil, right?
I know. Like you're not my teacher.
No, and you
Yeah.
don't know.
No, they think you don't know.
Oh, of course.
So, like retiring, leaving the classroom and starting the cookie business, how how does it translate to the cookie world? Like your teaching skills, and I'll talk about how outside of it being, I would say added income when you
Mhm.
teach. Tell me about, how has the transition been, and tell me about what is urging you to teach in the cookie world.
Fantastic. Great.
Hmm.
You really have a great way with questions. No
Thank
wonder you're so good at this. I think, for me, it really was, kind of what you said earlier in terms of this being a one-person show, right? It was
Mm-hmm.
lonely when I first retired, and I was focused more on kind of getting those orders out and making sure that I was bringing in that income, and when I started doing TikTok more regularly, people kept saying, "Why don't you teach classes? Why don't you teach classes?" And when I go live on TikTok, generally speaking, it really is a class because I'm
Yeah.
kind of demonstrating and talking people through it, and I'm being able to look at questions. And I was like, "Oh, you're right. We could do
Mm-hmm.
classes." And that is really how I found my joy in doing the cookie business, because before it
Yeah.
was about just getting all those cookies out, right? Making sure that the customer was happy. But the teaching aspect of it, being able to kind of have eyes in the back of your head and being able to answer questions and being able to kind of get a vibe for somebody that maybe they're having a bad day, or being able to understand that maybe somebody else needs me to explain something a little bit differently. The teaching comes back to me so naturally that it's been a really nice transition. So I
Mm-hmm.
offer in-person classes, which are really fun, and that's where I bring everything to everybody and we decorate together.
Yeah.
But I also offer virtual classes, which is really just eye-opening because I give everybody the tools that they need to bake their own cookies and to make their own icing, and then we gather together in a virtual
Mm-hmm.
setting and we decorate on a given day. So I think that transition for me has been really easy just because of my teaching background. It's not an easy task to kind of explain your job to someone unless
Mm-hmm.
you are comfortable kind of either in front of a camera or in front of an audience. It can be quite the challenge.
It is the challenge. So you did mention that joy. I heard that word joy in this in your, describing your transition. Are you a teacher or are you a baker, cookie or cake artist? What brings you joy? What aspect of it?
Yep. And again, I think this is going to be different for everybody depending on your personality, depending on what your strengths are. For me, the joy comes from the teaching. So the
Yeah.
joy comes from kind of sharing what I know and helping others grow, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
business or skills or maybe just going through something tough. So
Mm-hmm.
again, I think that's just something that's always been ingrained in me to be that nurturer. So I find the joy in the teaching. And matter of fact, my husband, who again, Mr. CPA, his idea of a business is probably very different than mine
Yes.
because I need to do what is going to make me happy and make me feel
Mm-hmm.
fulfilled.
Yeah.
Because as a teacher, I got a lot of my fulfillment from being able to have those light bulbs go off with the little ones.
Mm-hmm.
And it's transitioned into that with the cookie world because people will email me and say, Karen, I had no idea just that changing in that icing consistency was going to make me feel so much more confident, or being able to roll out that dough and have it not spread. Thank you so much for the recipe. So I that's what really does bring me the joy. Without that, I don't know that I would be as successful.
Yeah, yep, yep. You talk about baking and enjoying it, and I tell people all the time. For me, it's you have to feed your soul when you're doing this. It's not just something you're just doing. You have to definitely feed your soul in your decision making in a purposeful way that you're showing your art and sharing your art. So I can definitely I can I share a similar sentiment to you around that joy that that baking brings for me as what teaching does for you. Um,
Exactly, exactly.
Tell me, yeah, is it easier to teach kindergartners or adults? What's the difference?
That is a really good one. Let me tell you, I tell the the cookie world class participants that the benefit of teaching the adults is that they don't pick their nose
Yeah.
and then eat the icing, things like that.
Hmm.
But besides that, the younger crowd is an easier crowd because they're
Hmm.
so no judgy. They're not judging at all. They are literally just looking at you for that glimmer of light and love. They're not going, "Oh, that wasn't a very good letter K on the blackboard, Mrs. L." So
Hmm.
kindergartners are a lot easier. Now, most people don't agree with that because the idea of having 25 5-year-olds in front of you can
Yeah.
really be quite scary for some people. But for me,
Hmm.
I think it again, they're just so innocent and their love of learning and their just respect at that age is just amazing. So
Yeah.
I think the 5-year-old crowd is a little bit easier.
Okay. So you hear that? She prefer the kids.
Well, they're easier because they
She
don't
love the
judge.
babies. Yeah. She love them babies. Okay.
Yes, the babies,
So.
and listen, even my gray hairs. My kindergartner,
Mhm.
one little girl called it tinsel one year, and she wondered why I
Okay.
covered my tinsel up. And so literally after that, I said, "I am not covering my gray because this is tinsel."
It's tinsel. Absolutely. Um, what do so you're inspired by Nanny,
Mm.
but who else inspires you out here in this cake world? As you were deciding to embark on this full time, who inspires you?
Another great question. When I was first learning about having a cookie business, I went on YouTube, and the first person that I followed that was really interesting to me was Lisa at Borderlands Bakery. And what I liked was that she was putting out more like educational videos, little mini tutorials
Mm-hmm.
about how to make your dough and your icing and coloring and consistencies. And that got me thinking that being a cookier is not just about fulfilling orders. And I knew I
Mm-hmm.
could fulfill orders, but I wanted to figure out a way to kind of tie that teaching with decorating cookies. And that is really what sparked me. So having Lisa as that mentor and
Mm-hmm.
somebody that was doing it, she wasn't making money at the time off of those cute little videos. It was more of a
Mm-hmm.
way to I'm assuming for her also kind of give back and spread that joy of cooking to those beginners who we're eager, right? We're eager. We want to learn, but we want to feel
Yes.
connected to somebody. And I really, really respected and have continued to follow her and love, love, love what she's doing with her business. So I would say Lisa at Borderlands was really my very first person that I was like, wow, I want to be like her.
Yeah. So Lisa inspires you, and you're inspiring almost 100,000 individuals on TikTok here. Take us through your process from idea to execution of your cookie.
When it comes to my cookie business in terms of the orders and the custom orders that I do, generally
Mm-hmm.
speaking, it comes from an inquiry form on my website. Somebody says, hey, I want to have birthday cookies January the 2nd. And I respond with an email that says, yes, I have availability. I tell them what my starting price is. And then I ask them for inspiration, either photos or maybe an invitation of something that they
Okay.
like, so that I can kind of get their vibe. And then
Mm-hmm.
once they give me that vibe, I then am able to quote them with a price per dozen and
Mm-hmm.
then really fulfill the order that way. I like to do most of my designing on a program called Canva. And I absolutely adore that for being able to maybe put an image in there of something. Maybe it's a number one birthday candle. And then I can actually create my own cookie cutters from that image. And then because I have Eddie, I can
Mm-hmm.
print on that cookie or I can hand pipe on that cookie. And I feel like it's a really personalized vision for what a
Mm-hmm.
customer has wanted. So I would say Canva has really been my go-to program for designing my ideas. And then
Mm-hmm.
Cookie CAD for making those cookie cutters. And of course, Eddie's a big winner for printing cookies and logos and photos too.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you to share with our listeners what Eddie is. And do you use Eddie? What percentage of your work do you use Eddie for?
Great question. Eddie is an edible ink printer created by Primera, actually in Minnesota. That's where they are. That's where they create their Eddie.
Mm-hmm.
And Eddie is a tool, kind of just like any other tool that we have in our back pocket for cookie decorating. And Eddie is able to print directly on an iced cookie. So if you have a printer at home where you have to print on icing sheets and then kind of glue that icing sheet onto a cookie, this is a step up from that for sure, because we're literally
Mm-hmm.
just decorating right on a cookie. So I, for instance, do little Polaroid pictures. My daughter got engaged and I made a cookie that says, she said yes with their picture on it. And I was able to take their
Mm-hmm.
photograph, print it right on a cookie, and then I can add my embellishments to it in terms of making it into a cookie that for a customer. So Eddie, I would
Yeah.
say I do probably use Eddie on most of my orders. For instance, I may not print with Eddie on a cookie, but I might use Eddie to
Mm-hmm.
print a pattern for me, for instance, to make royal icing transfers. Eddie can print patterns for me on a tray. And I will often use him as a tool, even if it's not on the actual finished product in terms of the cookie. I like Eddie for
Yeah.
backgrounds. I can print a background on a cookie and then hand pipe writing on top. So I would say I use them in every order.
Yeah. You light up when you talk about Eddie. It's almost like it's a primary discovery, something that you're really excited about, just like a new tool, because you do light up when you're talking. And that's the light I saw when you taught in that Eddie class. Let me tell you about that. So yeah. So
Yes,
that it's
and
really a good
honestly,
tool.
it's very true in the sense that if I didn't have Eddie, could I still survive and do my business? Absolutely. But with Eddie, I'm able to have orders that I would not have before. So when I first purchased Eddie, the reason I bought Eddie was because of my husband. And he said, Karen, you've got to think of Eddie as a revenue generator, right? If you
Mm-hmm.
don't have Eddie, you can't accept that wedding photography Polaroid order. You can't do the logos for the Baltimore Orioles or what have you. So it opened my mind to thinking, you're right. It's not it. there's an initial investment, of course, but without him, I wouldn't have the opportunity to do the things that I can do. And time is
Yeah.
money, as you know. And Eddie is really a
Hmm.
huge, huge time saver for me. So they're not paying me, I promise, to discuss it. But it's just one of the tools that I feel like is right there at my beck and call if I need it.
Yeah. So you're using Eddie, you're making these cakes, you're teaching on TikTok, you're teaching online.
Mhm.
Do you find this whole artistry to be therapeutic at all? And does it feed your soul? And
Without a doubt.
especially with such a beautiful beginning with your grandmother.
Mhm.
Tell me about the therapeutic aspect of your baking and how does it feed your soul?
Absolutely. And I think for me, it really does come back to being that educator, that teacher. I feel like every new technique or strategy that I learn, I
Hmm.
I don't want to keep it. It to me, it's like that gatekeeping idea of keeping something for my personal value and nobody else's. It is just I don't understand it. So
Yeah.
every time I learn a new tool, I want to just get on TikTok or I want to do a video or I want to teach a class that shows somebody else that was just like me back in the
Hmm.
day who maybe doesn't know or just doesn't have the exposure or the access to that idea,
Yeah.
how to make it work for them. So the joy really does come from giving back and
Hmm.
sharing. That to me, if I kept it all in, it would just be a job. It would just be a way to retire a little bit early, and that was not enough for me. I really wanted to spread that joy because for me, in terms of the therapy, what comes what helps me get through life and get through hard times is sharing with others with a similar experience or
Hmm.
kind of what you said, bake through it. So
Yeah.
decorating or teaching through something, all of a sudden that problem doesn't seem quite as big, right?
Yes.
Because I've now gone past it or my mind has settled into it or I've
Hmm.
given that maybe just that mental break from thinking about it.
Hmm.
Now I'm looking at it a little bit differently in terms of perspective. And
Yeah.
oftentimes even on my TikTok live, there have been several occasions where I've cried. And usually it's around family things or maybe health issues that somebody has gone through. And again, I'm vulnerable, right? And I don't
Yeah.
hide that. I let people know if I'm having a bad day, I'm not going to get on. Honestly, that is not my thing. I'm not going to come on and necessarily work through it in a when I'm in a bad place. If I'm in a bad place, that's when I've got my head down and I'm thinking and I'm creating and I'm listening to music. But once I've worked through it,
Mhm.
I can share it in hopes that I can then be a help to somebody else that might be going through the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the message that we try to send with our foundation, the Cake Therapy Foundation, where we're really intentional about engaging women and girls
Mhm.
who've been, excuse me, where we're really intentional about engaging women and girls who have been through it, experienced some trauma in and out of the foster care system, being displaced out of their homes, that you can bake through it. Just you engage, you can, and then baking could also be a vital business.
Right.
You if you decide that it's just a skill for you to respond to some trauma, great. But then you can benefit, you can change the outcome of your children's lives and your own life, but through baking. I remember at the top of our conversation you mentioned your daughter coming home.
Yeah.
What are you most looking forward to as she returns? Are you looking forward to just the mommy daughter moments, the conversations? What have you missed the most in the kitchen with her?
Oh my goodness, I'm gonna cry. I I think for me, FaceTime is great, but there's just not that same feeling of just being able to look someone in the eyes and really know what they're feeling and what they're going through, and
Yeah.
being able to just sit down, whether we are having a deep discussion or not, and just
Mhm.
touch and hug and feel. To me, that is what I'm really most looking forward to, as well as having her in the kitchen with me because her joy, the baking, the rolling, the just the kind of diving into it for her is very therapeutic. And I think she's missed that. So her being able to kind of get in there and just, sometimes she'll even have her headphones on, right? She's a 24-year-old. So she'll have her headphones on, but I know she's working through it. She's working through something. I'm excited to be closer in proximity to be able to help her through things like that. And just having her and Adam home, they're getting married in September. So kind of this wedding process of being able to be in the same state, not across the country, is going to feel really, really good too. So I'm super, super looking forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been an educator in the classroom, I would say, because you continue to educate, right?
Yeah.
For over 30 years. What do you want your legacy to be? What is your legacy?
I hope that other people look at their self and want to be like me. Like, I want people to say, wow, I want to be able to give back. I want to be able to share. I want to be able to be that voice for somebody. I hope that that's what I am for people, and that they are looking at maybe content creators or people that they're seeing out there on TikTok or Instagram as accessible, and that they too can, kind of like what you said, you can do this. You could keep it as a hobby, or you could actually make a business out of it for yourself, as small or as big as you would like. And I hope that people understand that just being kind and sharing is really what it's about. I always strive to have community over competition. There is more than enough room in this baking world for all of us.
Absolutely.
And if we empower each other and we share and we continue to give back, the world is just going to be a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. If we continue to give back and share, the world will definitely be a better place. And we are going to leave it here. And
awesome.
This has been an amazing conversation. We're happy to have you here. Share with our listeners how they can find you.
Absolutely. So you can find me using the name Custom Cookies by Karen, and that is on all of my platforms. So mostly on TikTok and Instagram, YouTube, my website. All you're going to use is Custom Cookies by Karen, and you'll be able to find me.
Yeah, cool. So guess what? You didn't mention TikTok, and I did talk about having over 90,000 followers. Do you consider yourself an influencer? Like, tell me.
I think I'm influencing people. I hope I'm influencing people, meaning that they're looking at me going, oh my gosh, she's 57 and look at her on TikTok, right? I promise I don't sing or dance. I literally decorate cookies. But I hope I'm influencing people in all of the goodness that there is there. I'm hoping, and I'm not looking at that as like a influencer in anything except just be kind and share and find the joy. That's hopefully what I'm influencing people.
Yeah, good. So we're going to leave it here with influencer Karen from Custom Cookies by Karen. This has been an amazing conversation, and this has been a slice of joy and healing for me too. To our listeners, please go check out our website. It's the www.cake-therapy.org. Look at the work that we're doing and wanting to do for girls. You can, buy me a coffee. All that funding goes towards helping the girls in Minnesota, to really help teach them other art forms to respond to their trauma. We understand here that talk therapy is great and it's real, but let's increase individuals' knowledge around other art forms that can really help the individual to become a better them. So thank you so much for listening. This has been great. Karen, you and I will definitely need to partner on something else. This has been an amazing conversation today. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. You're amazing.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you guys for joining the Cake Therapy Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Cake Therapy Podcast. Your support means the world to us. Let us know what you thought about today's episode in the comment section. Remember to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And if you found the conversation helpful, please share it with a friend. Also, follow Sugar Spoon Desserts on all social media platforms. We invite you to support Cake Therapy and the work we do with our foundation by clicking on the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description or by visiting the Cake Therapy website and making a donation. All your support will go towards the Cake Therapy Foundation and the work we are doing to help women and girls. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode.